Hello and welcome to the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network. My name is Jonah Shiffman. I am joined as always by John Kelly. We're going to be talking UFC Vegas 37 going down this weekend at the Apex after a rare week off for the UFC last week. Went dark. NFL started obviously week one, officially in the books. We get a little bit of mixed martial arts back in our lives this weekend. 14 fights currently scheduled. We got a light heavyweight main event between Anthony Smith and Ryan Spann going down at the Apex. John, my friend, I know you have been in the NFL streets. We are back in the MMA streets. How are you doing, my man? Excited to be back talking fights with you.
Yeah, I'm doing great, man. Obviously, anytime we get football back in our lives, love the prop market in football. Obviously, a big fantasy player, DFS player in other sports as well, including football. So I'm super excited. This is the best time of the year because it's like, in theory, we take all of our profit from MMA and just roll it into football on Sunday. So I love this time of year. I'm excited. We got 14 fights on the card. It was supposed to be 15 until earlier today, but excited to talk through the fights after a week off. It always feels like a little bit too long. So I'm ready to get back at it with you, man.
Yeah, for sure. And you said roll over the MMA profits. I definitely do that, but then I just lose them all on Sunday. That's kind of how I tend to go about things during NFL season. But yeah, let's get right down into it because we do have 14 fights to go over. We did have one canceled earlier today, as you mentioned, but 14 fights is certainly a lot in terms of DFS. So we'll certainly touch on that as we go through just kind of general slate strategy and all of that. And hopefully people will file through into the chat. It's an NFC East Thursday night football game, so no one really wants to watch that. John, I know you already cashed your Daniel Jones over rushing prop. I'm wearing my Daniel Jones shirt on the show to support you. So yeah, hopefully people will tune in live, say what's up in the chat. We're excited to have everyone here. Without further ado, let's move on to our first fight of the night. We got Emily Whitmire as a small favorite, minus 120 currently in the betting market against Hannah Goldy. Goldy comes back as a plus 100 even money underdog in the spot. Whitmire is $8,500 on DraftKings. Goldy is $7.7K. And that's kind of where I want to kick off my breakdown for this fight. So with the week off last week, it's been about 10 days since DraftKings prices have been out. Oftentimes we get DraftKings prices between Tuesday and Wednesday of fight week. But for this week, they've been out for a long time. And because of that, we have some inefficient pricing, meaning that when the DraftKings prices came out, they were accurate to what the betting market was, the same way they always are. Emily Whitmire was a bigger favorite than minus 120, so she would always be 8.5K. But now we've had 10 days for these lines to mature. This fight is nearly a pick'em, yet we see Whitmire $800 more on DraftKings. That's kind of a theme throughout the show. The third fight we'll talk about in a little bit is minus 115 versus minus 105, basically a pick'em fight. And we have one fighter almost more actually than $1,500 more expensive on DraftKings. So that's also another theme in addition to there being 14 fights to just kind of keep in mind here is a lot of these lines on DraftKings or a lot of these DraftKings prices do not necessarily line up with where the current betting market is. As of Thursday night, we're 2 days away from the fights. We got weigh-ins in the morning. But John, I guess in terms of the breakdown for this fight specifically, I don't have a great read here. I haven't made a bet. I know a lot of people have come in on Hannah Goldy. We've seen significant line movement in her favor. Hannah Goldy basically is the type of fighter she looks like, right? She's super jacked at 115 pounds, and her game is basically predicated purely on power. She's trying to push women against the cage. She's trying to hold them there. Occasionally we'll go for takedowns. She seems to hit, decently hard. I wouldn't say she's a big hitter or anything like that. And then with Emily Whitmire, it's kind of the opposite, right? She's a little bit more technical. She doesn't have the pure strength that Hannah Goldy type does. So for me, I'm passing on this fight. I think I'm going to pick Goldy. An interesting thing to look at here, John, and I'll kind of let you talk about this a little more in depth, but Emily Whitmire, all of her losses professionally have come via submission, and Hannah Goldy doesn't have a submission on her record yet. She hasn't even attempted one within the UFC, I should say, but she did land 2 takedowns in her last time out, a fight that I think you faded her in. So if she looks to wrestle here, perhaps that's a path, but yeah, it's a pass for me. Do you have anything here on our first fight of the night, John?
Yeah, what was her last fight? Was it the Polyana Viana fight? Was that her most recent one?
No, because Goldy fought like 2 weeks ago against
Goldy. Okay,
yeah, Goldy,
I thought you meant Whitmire. Yeah, I've actually faded both of them in the past. So I cashed that Polyana Viana submission at 5-1. That's what I thought you were talking about. But Hannah Goldy, I honestly, I don't get it. I know some people are trying to fade Whitmire here. And obviously it's low level on both sides, but Hannah Goldy is just, one-dimensional, doesn't really throw a ton of volume when she gets backed up, can't cut off the cage. She's just going to circle around the octagon. She is powerful. She has some powerful hooks, but it's like, I mean, the blueprint's figured out. She hasn't improved since her Dana White Contender Series fight. On the flip side, Emily Whitmire, like, I know there's obvious concerns with her as well, but it's mostly when she's facing like pretty decent competition, or at least decent submission grapplers. Amanda Hebos in her debut submitted her. That was a plus 750 ticket. I mentioned the Viana sub as well. Like, that's where she struggles, but she does have some okay skills as well. She's a decent judo wrestler. I think she would be the one to land takedowns in this matchup. And yeah, I mean, I just think the striking, like, I guess Goldy has a slight striking advantage, but like, it's not to the point where I'd be betting her at close to a pick 'em. Like, if I had to bet this fight, I'd be laying it with Emily Whitmire, but I obviously don't have a bet on this fight. So it's not like, it's a huge edge either way. But yeah, I favor Whitmire. I think the striking's relatively even. I expect her to be more active and to be the one with actual wrestling upside. So yeah, give me Whitmire as a slight favorite, but on such a full fight card with 14 fights now, it's not really a fight I'm looking to get exposure to either way. But Whitmire would certainly have the more upside on DraftKings, in that she could land multiple takedowns if she comes in with that game plan.
Yeah, for sure. Agree. You mentioned 14 fights. Don't want to spend too long between them. Just a quick shout out. We got Mark in the chat saying he has an 11 fight accumulator. I believe that is what we call parlays in the United States. So certainly a wild card. And then our guy Liam as well. I was on his show yesterday. He's excited to hear John Kelly's takes. As am I. That's why we're here. That's why the people are here. Let's move on to the second fight of the night. We got Heili Alateng, currently a minus 130 favorite against Gustavo Lopez. Lopez comes back plus 110. DraftKings prices for Alateng $8,400, and then Lopez as our underdog is 7.8K. And I'll go first here, John. This is actually a bet a fight, I should say, that I do have a bet on. I currently only have bets on 2 of the 14 fights going down this Saturday, but this is one of 2. So if you don't mind, I'll just take the floor real quick. And I'm on Heili Alateng here. I bet at minus 105 about a week ago at this point. Took that over at BetMGM, and look, I don't think this is necessarily a super high level fight between two guys that have, massive ceilings within the division. But something that I think is interesting is kind of the strength of schedule these two guys have faced, especially Gustavo Lopez. Gustavo Lopez, super tough task on short notice against Marab in his UFC debut, gets mauled in that spot. Pretty predictable outcome, comes back and gets a win over Anthony Burkock, which honestly is a guy who is on his way out, no longer with the UFC, and is really Gustavo Lopez's best outing in the UFC to this point by a wide margin, because next up he got, Adrian Yanez. And I said this yesterday, but, Adrian Yanez, I got to be careful about what I say with the guy, because he retweeted me when I was talking about Contender Series the other week. But in terms of Adrian Yanez, like, I think this kid is basically the goods on the feet. I think his striking is super high level, tough task for a guy like Gustavo Lopez. I just didn't like what I saw in that fight. We knew it would be an uphill battle for Lopez, but there was no activity from him, no volume, a real lack of takedown attempts, which I thought he needed to win that fight. And that's part of the reason why I'm on Alateng here, because Alateng has had, not the easiest UFC schedule either. He just fought Casey Kenny and got his butt whooped in that matchup. I got kicked to the body roughly 1,000 times over the course of 15 minutes in that matchup. But when we look at Alateng, he's more willing to come forward, more willing to throw volume. And really what I think it comes down to here, and why I'm betting him at minus 105 earlier in the week, is because I think he's the better wrestler in this spot, right? Like, he fought back in Beijing. He was wrestling for them on some form of a national team. And, I'm not going to pretend that, wrestling for like the Chinese national team means you're a world beater in the UFC, but we've seen him go to the takedowns multiple times in the UFC. The Dana Batgirl fight, the Ryan Benoit fight, he had over 3 takedowns in both of those. And I just think he's the guy who's going to be more active here and more willing to wrestle in this spot. I do think he'll be able to get Gustavo Lopez down. So not necessarily a high-level fight. I don't think that Alateng is a lock by any stretch, but at around a pick 'em where I got him at, I definitely think it was worth a wager. Current market, minus 130. You could talk me into it, but I think I would likely pass at this spot. But if people are looking for action at this point in the week, I still think that Heili Alateng is the side. John, what do you have here? Second fight of the night. We got Alateng versus Lopez. You siding with me, or are we going to disagree here on the second fight of the evening?
No, I am siding with you. I think Alateng by decision is probably most likely outcome. Wouldn't be surprised to see him knock out Lopez. Lopez durability has been a concern. obviously coming off the knockout loss to Adrian Yanez. But like you said, I just, where I trust Lopez to be more active early in the fight. We've seen it time and time again now, even dating back to the regional scene, where the cardio just doesn't really hold up when he tries to fight at a high pace. And you mentioned the takedowns. Like, I think Alateng will be able to land takedowns as well. I just think overall he's probably the fighter I trust more. The durability for sure. He's, we've seen him eat some heavy shots. You mentioned, what was it, the Batcherel fight? Like,
yeah,
he got stung quite a bit in that fight, and it was like, it didn't even phase him. So I think that's probably Lopez's win condition, is like landing something big early. But even in that scenario, like, I trust Alateng's durability. And you mentioned he probably has the wrestling upside as well. So I'm with you. I think slight favorite Alateng is right. Shout out to Tim. Thanks for joining us in the chat. And I think if you got on Alateng early, then for sure. So shout out to you. And then Liam with the nice CLV humble brag there. Shout out to you guys. That's a great bet if you got it early.
Yep, let's move on to our third fight of the night. We got Impa Kasanganay against Carlston Harris, and this is an interesting matchup because we've seen a lot of movement in the betting markets. Currently, we have Impa Kasanganay just over a pick'em right now. He's minus 115 with Harris being minus 105, so he's an underdog, but you still got to pay a little bit of vig, a little bit of juice in order to bet him. Draftkings prices, and this is what I was talking about at the front of the show, like Impa is $8,900 and Carlston Harris is $7.3K. That's a over $1,500 price difference, despite the fact that the odds makers are making this fight roughly, I don't have a calculator in front of me, but like roughly 51 to 53% Impa Kasanganay. I mean, really projected to be a very close fight. And John, I'll let you go first here because this is a good fight and we've seen a lot of action. I mentioned the line movement. If you were to bet on Carlston Harris right after our last UFC event, so 2 Saturdays ago, you could have gotten like plus 135. But at this point, he hasn't quite flipped to a favorite yet, but it looks like it's possible by fight time. We are, 40 hours away from the fight starting on Saturday. I think there's a chance that we see Carlston Harris close a favorite here. Obviously, a lot of people are backing him in the market. Have you contributed to that? And kind of what's your read on the fight in general?
Yeah, no play for me. I was one of those people where I'm like, Carlston Harris. I know a few people we know mentioned it a couple weeks back, and I'm like, Harris as a decent sized dog. That's probably going to be a bet for me, but I want to tape the fight. By the time I taped the fight, he was already to plus 110. And at that point, maybe there's a small edge still, but not enough for me to play it. Just because Impa, like, I still think Impa is making improvements. We'll see if, like, I struggle if Harris isn't able to land takedowns. That's where I struggle because his striking is not bad, but if we think this plays out as a striking match, I do favor Impa Kasanganay. He is making improvements. We've seen it his last couple times out. He's training at Sanford MMA, one of the better striking camps in mixed martial arts, and he's just very athletic. I know Harris is going to have the wrestling advantage, is going to have the grappling advantage. I favor him to probably land takedowns, but it's just like, in order to bet him, like I want to feel pretty confident that he's able to do that. And I'm just not really there. If the fight plays standing, I do think Kasanganay would have the advantage. But when it comes to DraftKings, in fights like this, where I think it's competitive, it's just going to come down to which style dictates how the fight plays out. In that scenario, I'm just going to look to DraftKings, and it's like DraftKings is easy to see that Carlston Harris has more upside because Kasanganay's win condition, like outside of an early knockout, which I don't think is that likely, is just going to be a striking based decision where he doesn't score well. Whereas Carlston Harris, his win condition, multiple takedowns, possibly even a submission victory. So when it comes to no bet for me, but when it comes to DraftKings, I'm definitely going to have a lot more exposure to the slight underdog in Carlston Harris.
Yeah, so I agree with your take. And honestly, I think that you mentioned that, Carlston Harris needs to get this fight to the floor in order to win, needs to land multiple takedowns. I honestly think his path to victory is even a little bit more narrow than that. Of course, he has to get the fight to the ground. I think we both agree that Impa is the better striker in this matchup. But for me, like when I go back and watch Carlston Harris on tape, this guy does not have great takedowns. He's really good from 2 positions. So if he gets you standing and is able to body lock you as he pushes you against the cage or even in open space and land a trip, He's really good at getting takedowns via, body lock trips. But other than that, like, I'm not impressed by his singles or doubles. There aren't even that many examples of them on tape. And then in terms of the grappling, I do think he's a better pure grappler than Impa Kasanganay on the ground. But the one position that Carlston Harris really excels in is when he gets you in that front headlock and he goes through kind of a series of chokes, right? He runs you through the anaconda. We've seen him kind of a wide range of chokes when he gets you to the front headlock. He will be looking for darts, anaconda, whatever you really present to him. And they're all similar, right? Like he just gets you in the front headlock, snaps you down into like a sprawl position on the ground. And he's pretty lethal from that specific position. But if he doesn't get there, more than once in the fight, and if he doesn't finish once he gets to that position, I'm not sure, what I make of his chances here, because Impa is not a bad wrestler. I don't think he's going to get taken down via single legs or double legs in this spot. And he's a decent defensive grappler. We've seen him stuck on his back a few times, but I don't think it's going to be a situation like Christian Aguilera in Harris's debut, where it was like one takedown and then the fight was over. And I do think the stand-up is there's a decent discrepancy. I actually think I might come in and play Impa Kasanganay, especially if he flips to an underdog, probably even a pick him. I would take a shot here, just kind of be the buyback in the market. I'm high on both these guys, right? Like I bet Carlston Harris in his debut. I bet Impa Kasanganay, and I know Impa got knocked out by Buckley and hasn't necessarily been super impressive, but we mentioned with Marc-Andre Barrios last week, who I honestly think is a pretty great comparison for Impa Kasanganay. Like, if you have durability and cardio at 170 pounds or higher, you're probably a top 15 to top 20 fighter inside of that division. I kind of just think that's what's going to win Impa this fight. His stand-up isn't beautiful by any stretch, but he rolls with punches a little bit. I do think he has more power than Carlston Harris on the feet. And if he can, avoid those body lock trips and avoid the front headlock position, which is obviously easier said than done for a guy in Carlston Harris who's 16-4, basically off of those two things. If he can avoid those situations, I like Impa Kasanganay to win this fight. Obviously, we have 14 fights, so I don't want to spend too much time here. Last thing I'll say before we move on is I think because of the stale prices a little bit on DraftKings, where we have these big underdogs kind of in the mid-range and we have these small underdogs super low price, I think there's some interesting spots where like you want to pay up to get contrarian, and we'll talk about them a little bit further down the card, where it might be a pick 'em fight and someone's 9K and someone's 7K, but everyone knows that it's a pick 'em fight, so they're all playing the 7K fighter, whereas the 9K fighter, does he project super well for his price point? No, but in order to win a GPP, you probably need a first round finish, and I think that those are still fairly likely. This is not a spot like that for me. I'm not going to pay up for Impa. I might bet him, but 8.9K is a really, really expensive price tag. I'll probably have some if I run 150 teams, but definitely not a core target of mine, despite the fact that I like him to win the fight here. Let's move on to our next fight, John. We got Erin Blanchfield making her UFC debut here as a -400 favorite against Sarah Alpar. Comes back plus 300 for the veteran in Alpar. Blanchfield, 9.4K on DraftKings. Alpar is 6.8K. And a lot of people have been kind of anticipating this Erin Blanchfield debut. She's someone who's only 22 years old. She has wins over Victoria Leonardo, who we got burned on last time out, but is a UFC level fighter. Kate Hansen, who's won at the UFC level and is considered to be an up and coming prospect. And her only loss, professionally, is to Tracy Cortez. And Cortez is someone that we've seen the market really respects. We've seen her have success inside the UFC. So I think Erin Blanchfield is a pretty legitimate prospect. There's still some green elements to her game. Her striking isn't the most crisp in the world. She's kind of primarily a grappler. But at 22 years old, I think that she has a decently bright future in this division. And on the other side, Sarah Alpar is someone who I just don't really rate super well. Like, she's an okay wrestler. She's going to try and wrestle, but to me, she just doesn't really have any skill set advantages over Erin Blanchfield here, outside of, having fought more times, just pure experience. But like I said, Erin's fought some of the best fighters, up and coming fighters, in this division at just age 22. So I won't spend too much time here. I do think Erin is clearly the side. I'm not betting her -400, but honestly, I'd be surprised if she doesn't cover the price here. I think it's a pretty easy matchup for her in her debut. John, do you feel similarly here? And assuming that you do, assuming that you're not on the Sarah Alpar side, I would be surprised if you were. What do you kind of make of Erin Blanchfield on DK? Because $9.4 thousand, she certainly is someone we've seen, lock up submissions before, head kick knockouts. Like, she has some finishing ability, but it is a 14 fight slate. We need to make sure we're capturing as much upside as possible. What are you doing with Blanchfield and DK, and kind of what do you think of the fight in general as well?
Yeah, I'm not a Sarah Alpar guy. Even on Dana White Contender Series, wasn't expecting her to win. I don't think Dana was expecting her to win. You know, she fought, who was it? Shayna Young, was that the fight? She fought one of the young prospects that they were
Yeah, that was her
was
fight.
it Shayna? Okay, yeah. So she fought Shayna Young 2 seasons ago, and they were trying to showcase Shayna Young, and then it was like Sarah Alpar took her down, controlled the grappling. Like Shayna Young had no sense of a ground game. And then Dana was like, "Oh, well, I guess we have to give her a contract." Like, and then she hasn't looked good. It's just that she's not UFC level. Like, that's what it is. Like, she fought Jessica Rose Clark and got absolutely beat to a pulp in that fight. Got knocked out with a knee. Somehow Chris Tione let the fight continue because he thought it was illegal. Then he didn't. Whatever. But I mean, it was crazy because they said on the broadcast she had her wedding like the next week or something like that, and her nose literally got like disconfigured. I'm still waiting to see those wedding photos. I'm wondering how they turned out, but yeah, it's just her path to victory is always her wrestling. Like, she was an All-American high school wrestler, so she does have a credentialed wrestling background. But at the same time, it's like, how many girls in her weight class were wrestling in Kentucky or Louisiana or wherever she's from, somewhere in that area. Like, I just, you know, at the UFC, everybody's an okay wrestler, like, for the most part. And now she's dropping down to another weight class where she just got dominated at 135. Like, now they're dropping her down to 125. I don't know what kind of shape she's going to be in, but to answer your question, I think Blanchfield's a little expensive at that price on DraftKings. Like, at that price, we certainly need a finish, or we need multiple takedowns. And I just don't think that's going to be her primary game plan. I think Alpar could possibly land takedowns here, but if she does, I think she's at risk of getting submitted. And Blanchfield has a solid wrestling background as well. So I'm not even convinced that Alpar can do the one thing that she's not bad at. And then the striking isn't even close. Like, Blanchfield probably lands some big head kicks here that do some damage. I think Blanchfield has the grappling upside. Like I said, if it does go to the mat, the striking disparity is going to be pretty clear here as well. So I think Blanchfield covers. But in terms of DraftKings, 14 fight card, I know I said that before, but it's the truth. At 9.4K with so many other options that are cheaper than her, she's not going to be a core target for me.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I did a little research while you were talking. It does look like Sarah Alpar got married on October 10th in Oklahoma City. So some people grind. Yeah, some people grind the tape. Other people grind the wedding websites. That's what I was just doing as you were talking there. So
how does the nose look? How does the nose look?
So there's no pictures of her at the wedding. They're just like it's like her wedding website. Like, they got like a fancy website, her and her husband. Her husband might be a football player. There's a football involved in the pictures. I don't know. I'm diving deep.
All that GoFundMe money, man. It goes to their wedding website.
Yeah, maybe it did. Shout out to Jake Paul for that. Let's move on to our next fight here. We got second biggest favorite on the card, and it's not often that we see a guy with a nearly minus 700 price tag next to his name not being the biggest favorite on the card. But that's the situation we're in this weekend. We got Montel Jackson minus 675. I see a minus 620 out there against JP Bays, who comes back plus 460. See a plus 475, I believe, is the best price on the market for JP Bays as an underdog. Montel Jackson 9.5K on DK, JP Bays 6.7K, and that's just another thing that comes with having such a massive slate is, people get overwhelmed, and I wrote this up in my article for FTN Daily this week, kind of describing my thoughts on the slate. People get overwhelmed seeing a price like $9.5 thousand for a Montel Jackson, or a price like $9.6 thousand for Arman Tsarukyan, and we could talk about them as individual plays, but something to remember this week, just from a pure price standpoint, is the underdogs are so cheap as well. Like, when we have a 10-fight slate, the cheapest underdog might be 7.2K. This week, we have multiple fighters at 6.7K and a massive mid-range to kind of pick from. So we'll talk about Montel Jackson as an individual DFS play in a second. But the one thing I would say, just kind of overarching here, is don't, get discouraged by seeing, a 9.5K or 9.3K next to someone's name on this week's slate, because there are really cheap fighters to choose from. And there's fighters in good spots that are in the 7.5 to 7.2, 7.3, 7.4, that range. So I would just say, don't be scared off by seeing a price like 9.5K, because I do think you can make it work this week. As for this fight, Jon, I guess I'll kick it to you first. I've seen a bunch of people whose opinions I value be on JP Buys in this spot. He lost his UFC debut. Shout out to us for cashing an underdog ticket on Silva in that spot. But JP Buys just kind of didn't come through, got knocked down 3 times in the round of that fight, but does have a redemption chance here. He's moving up to 135 pounds against Montel Jackson. Do you give Buys a shot here as a live underdog despite the big price tag, or do you think Montel Jackson just kind of rolls as the price might indicate he will?
Yeah, I know a few people that we know are on JP Buys in this spot, but it's not something that I really I'm not there personally. Like, I think JP Buys was exposed in that Bruno Silva fight, but also like I don't see him being able to implement that same Brett Johns game plan against Montel Jackson. I think Brett Johns is just a much better grappler than JP Buys, and I know he has like some sense of wrestling and grappling as well, but enough to move up a weight class and then manhandle a guy who's very strong in Montel Jackson. Like, I just personally don't see it. I think the striking, there's a huge edge for Montel in the striking. And then even in the grappling, like, I think Jackson's strong enough. He's going to be much bigger. He's very physical. Like, I'd be surprised if JP Buys is just like able to drag him to the mat and then control him and stick to him like a leech. And that's really what he has to do to have a chance in this matchup. Now, do I want to pay minus 675? Absolutely not. Like, this line has blown out now more than I think it was when Jackson fought Jesse Strader, who was a nobody. Like, that part doesn't make sense to me. But at the same time, like, I'm not rushing to the window to bet JP Buys because I think Jackson probably kills him too. So I like Jackson more than Blanchfield, who we talked about in the previous fight. So if I'm paying up in that range, Jackson, not only does he have knockout first round upside, but he's a guy we've also seen land takedowns at volume as well. And then on a side note, anytime you hear the commentary reference the size of his hands, then you have to drink. So keep that in mind on Saturday.
Yeah, hopefully he gets the first round finish, or else we're all going to be blacked out by the main card this weekend. But in terms of how I view this matchup, I just went back and checked. It looks like Montel closed about minus 720 consensus price against Jesse Strader. But honestly, with everyone building parlays on Saturday, I'm sure he's going to get to the same price here. And look, I'm not a JP Buys guy. I faded him in his debut. I will say I think he's a considerably better fighter than Jesse Strader, and I don't think Montel Jackson. I don't think we know that Montel Jackson is a better fighter, in September for this fight than he was in March for his last fight because it was just so short against such a low-level opponent. But I kind of think Montel, I think he pays off this price tag here. I'm not betting him at minus 600, minus 700, but I expect him to kind of look every bit of that price tag. JP Buys is someone who very much relies on his offensive grappling. He's a little bit of a front runner, needs to get ahead early, doesn't have great cardio, has not necessarily bounced back great from facing adversity in the past, I will say. And so in this spot, it's one of those things with him where, like, I think he's going to need to have success early. And JP Buys is someone who has a very condensed skill set, in my opinion. And then he's facing a guy in Montel Jackson who averages over 4 takedowns per 15 in the UFC, has a knockdown in his last 3 fights. Like, I'm not necessarily drinking the Kool-Aid on Montel Jackson being top 5, top 10 long-term, but I do kind of think that this is a matchup where he should just destroy Buys at distance. And, we saw him exposed a little bit. I cashed on Brett Johns against Montel Jackson. His takedown defense isn't great, but you got to close the distance, man. And JP Buys has fought at 135 before, but I think to me looks more naturally like a 125er. And then he's going up to 135 to face, Montel is a massive 135er. I know we make fun of the commentators talking about his hands and whatnot, but like, the guy is legitimately big for this weight class. I'm not sure how long he's going to be at 135. I just think it's a real uphill battle for JP Buys. I wrote up Montel Jackson as my high-priced fighter to target in my FTN Daily article. I just think his upside is so immense, nearly 50% implied by the betting market to finish in this spot. I think he can land takedowns. Look, there are some good options to choose from. We'll get to Arman Tsarukyan in a bit. Certainly some guys in the main event, a couple of fights on the main card to target, but I do think I'm going to try to get up to as much Montel Jackson as possible this weekend because I expect him to win and I expect him to do so in style. All right, so we'll quickly move on. I do quickly want to note that the Mata versus Van Camp fight that was scheduled for this week has been canceled about 30 minutes to an hour before we started recording this show, so I didn't have any action there. I think John had a bet on the fight not to go the distance, so maybe they'll reschedule it down the line. I saw Mata submission 34-1, but FanDuel is only letting me bet $22 on it. But yeah, so that fight's canceled. Just a heads up for anyone watching this live who hasn't heard the news. If you're watching it on a playback or listening on the podcast app, I'm sure you know as of now. So let's move on to our next fight, which features a guy who stepped in on late notice this week as well. We got Zhu Rong, who is not stepping in on late notice. He remains on the card and is now a minus 300 favorite against Brandon Jenkins. Jenkins is stepping in. He had a knockout over Jacob Kilburn with a really nice flying knee, actually, on PFL a few weeks ago, but he steps in here short notice, about plus 245 underdog. Rong is in the minus 310 range. I've seen a little bit of Jenkins money come in, but the line is kind of new. Market isn't sure, so I'm not exactly sure which way this line will end up going. But look, John, we were talking a little bit before we went live on air here. You see a minus 300 line next to a guy like Zhu Rong, and I'm thinking, like, if there's a living, breathing body across the cage from him, UFC level or not, like I'm probably intrigued at taking a shot. I know you said that you haven't looked a ton at Jenkins's tape. This is a relatively short replacement, but kind of what's your read on Zhu Rong as a fighter, and what are some things you're looking for here, kind of before you tape Jenkins necessarily, like something you're looking for in his game in order to bet him? Because I think I'm intrigued for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on the main thing. It's the price, right? Like Zhu Rong minus 310. Like, who is sitting there? I think he opened at like what, minus 180 or something. Like, who was sitting there like, oh, gotta lay it with Zhu Rong this week? Like, I just don't get it. Like, didn't look good in his debut, didn't look great on his regional tape, and honestly just looked more timid in his debut than anything. Like, at least on the regional scene, like, he was swinging heavies, he was moving forward, has a lot of first round knockouts on the Chinese regional scene. But then in his debut, it was like he was gun shy. So it was kind of concerning when that's probably his best way to win at the UFC level, is to surprise somebody and catch him with a big shot. And he wasn't really looking to do that in his debut. So now seeing him as a minus 310 favorite, I haven't got around to taping Brandon Jenkins yet, so I don't have a strong take on Jenkins, but it's almost like take anybody at plus 250 against Zhu Rong. Like, I don't want to say take anybody because I don't know how bad this Jenkins dude is, but for somebody that just recently fought in PFL, has some finishes on his record as well, like, I don't know, man. You would have a hard time convincing me that Zhu Rong can cover minus 310 in this matchup. So really, if Jenkins has any sort of okay striking, but also if he has any sense of wrestling or grappling, I'll probably just, it's probably just a blind bet at this price. But the more interesting conversation is DraftKings, because now Zhu Rong, what's his price?
He's 7.6K right? On DraftKings, 7,600, and it's going to be minus 200. I personally tend to think that when we bet something, not that we necessarily move the market, but I like to think we're on the sharp side that the market will eventually move to. I don't think he's going to necessarily close minus 300, but Zhu Rong's going to be a significant favorite in this spot at 7.6K.
Exactly. And that's my point, is like, everybody's going to see a minus 250, whatever he closes at favorite at 7,600. Like, even on a 14 fight card, he's going to be probably the most popular fighter on the slate, if not one of the most popular fighters on the slate. So in large field GPPs like the main, like, we're always looking to get leverage. Like, not only are you getting leverage, but this is a leverage spot where it makes so much sense to just take some shares of Brandon Jenkins, because nobody thinks Zhu Rong is a good fighter at this stage in his career. And almost nobody thinks, at least we don't think, he's going to cover minus 300. Maybe he gets one of those early first round knockouts. Outside of that, even if he wins here, like, say he wins a low scoring striking based decision, if he's 50% owned and you fade him, you're looking pretty good here. And if Jenkins pulls off the upset, which I wouldn't surprise me at all, like, you're getting massive leverage against a guy who's going to be one of the more popular fighters on the slate, who, again, we both have some serious concerns about. So I just think from a leverage standpoint alone, like regardless of how good or bad Jenkins is going to look on tape, to me, in terms of the leverage, I think it's a spot you just have to capitalize on.
Yeah, so I kind of hung you out to dry, letting you go first here, considering that I'm the one who actually, I've taped Brendan Jenkins before. So apologies on that, John. In terms of what people are looking for, in terms of like just kind of what the guy looks like, very like loose stand up, like he isn't necessarily a crisp striker. I wouldn't classify him as that, but he throws from weird angles, kind of has like I don't want to compare him to someone in the UFC, but like a little bit of Bill Algeo in him, where it's just like super weird angles, hands down, kind of a tall guy for the weight class. I believe he's the taller fighter in this matchup against Zhu Rong. And I just wasn't impressed with Zhu Rong in his debut, right? Like this is a guy who's known to be explosive, and I didn't even think he was going to be that good coming into the UFC. And yeah, he's allegedly 21 years old. He might be a guy who grows over time, but like he looked tepid, I think was the word you used, against Kazula Vargas. Got reversed on the ground. We expected him to kind of win the stand-up. Didn't really do that. He did land a few takedowns. I haven't taped Brendan Jenkins off his back. I do know they went 5 rounds against Erin Mitchell earlier this year, and that fight went into the championship rounds, obviously went the distance. He did end up on his back a little bit in that fight, so I just want to kind of go back and rewatch. I believe it was the 4th or 5th round of that matchup, so I'm going to do that. But look, I'm intrigued, and in terms of DraftKings, I'm also going to be underweight on Zhu Rong. Look, like objectively speaking, in cash game formats, he is the play, right? You get a guy at market implied 60 to 70% chance to win the fight at 7.6K. You take the semi-free square and you just move on. But in terms of GPPs, which is where the majority of my action lies for DraftKings, I would be shocked if I'd come anywhere close to meeting the field on Zhu Rong, because like you mentioned, sometimes if it's a 10 fights, like you just need guys who are going to win. And maybe some fights get canceled, hopefully not, knock on wood in that regard. But like with 14 fights, you need to actually do something like productive in a win, right? Like 70 points at 7.6K. We can talk, it's 9.5x, almost 10x your salary. But the truth of the matter is, like, you need raw points to win on these big GPP slates, because 9.5x, 10x sounds good in theory. But then if a 7.1K fighter scores 100 points, you're basically drawing dead unless you have some sort of unique build and, 2 or 3 of the big favorites put up the biggest scores on the slate. And lineup construction gets a little wonky there, but I'll be underweight on I don't necessarily think that all of my leverage will go to Jenkins, because I think it's a big enough, if it was 8, 9, 10 fights, maybe you need direct leverage where if Zhu fails, then Jenkins succeeds. But to me, I would just kind of prefer to go elsewhere. Like there are pivots around that price point. Devin Clark is cheaper than him. I know Mike Rodriguez is cheaper than Zhu Rong. And in GPPs, those are kind of the spots I'll be looking to, personally speaking. Let's move on to our next fight, which I don't think will have much DraftKings goodness. We talked about DFS for a minute in that last fight, but next up we got Raquel Pennington, Rocky Pennington, currently a minus 130 favorite over Pannie Kianzad. The DraftKings prices for Pennington are 8.7K and Kianzad comes back 7.5K. I actually think this is an interesting stylistic matchup from the standpoint that it's kind of striker versus grappler, but the grappler in Raquel Pennington is someone who's very dedicated to trying to wrestle and kind of cage push. That's most of her offense. But she isn't actually a great technical wrestler. Like, I'm not convinced that she's going to be able to put Pannie Kianzad on her back, but I am pretty convinced that Raquel Pennington's going to be able to make this fight dirty, get in the clinch, kind of engage in a lot of cage pushing, grappling, those kind of sequences. So I think it's interesting that she's a small favorite here. Pannie Kianzad, people faded her earlier this year against Alexis Davis, thinking that she would get taken down that spot, and she kept it on her feet. And when it's on the feet, like, Kianzad's a decent kickboxer. She's not someone who's going to necessarily, blow you away with power. She doesn't have a finish in the UFC yet, but she is someone who's going to kind of come out there and just be able to outbox you, out kickbox you. So in this regard, I think that Raquel Pennington deserved favorites. I think she's going to kind of be able to dictate where the fight goes a little bit. But it's hard for me to bet her at minus 125 when I think all of her win condition is very narrow, right? Like, it's going to be difficult for Pennington to blow out Pannie Kianzad here, because I think most of her offense is going to come via pushing her against the cage and just kind of grinding Pannie out. But on the other side, when they are at distance for however long that may be, I think Kianzad will have a lot of success in the kickboxing realm. I think she'll clearly out-volume Pennington. And look, Raquel Pennington is 33 years old at this point, but to me, she's fighting like someone a lot older. Like the Marion Renault fight was her last one over a year, a little bit like a year, maybe like 16 months ago at this point. And that win hasn't aged well. The Holly Holm performance was a total dud. She did beat Irene Aldana previously to that, but like we're not getting peak Raquel Pennington, and she's not someone who ever really has won by large margins. So it's a pass for me. I'm not betting Kianzad just because I do think that there's a solid chance she gets like pushed up against the cage for 10 minutes. I think it's going to be a close fight, split decision type, where it's like Pennington has, octagon control, as they call it on the broadcast, and then Kianzad has like the damaging offense, but it might actually not be that damaging. So yeah, that's kind of my take on the fight here. I think it's pretty binary. If it's at distance, Kianzad wins. If it's not, I think Pennington will win. Not one I'm interested in from DraftKings point of view. Massive favorite to go the distance. Don't foresee a lot of takedowns here or knockdowns finishing upside. Should be relatively small on both ends. John, I think I covered a lot for this fight. Do you have anything else here on this matchup before we move on to our next one that I think is slightly more enticing from a DK point of view?
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add there. I basically think the same thing, right? Like Raquel Pennington, we know what she's going to do. She's going to get in close. She's going to make it dirty. She does have a little bit of a boxing background, but like you mentioned, she doesn't go to it really. Like you see, unless it's like dirty boxing up against the fence, like you see her look to the wrestling, and she's not like, she doesn't have much technique like you hit on. Like I wouldn't be shocked if she can land takedowns here, but Pannie, her takedown defense, it's like at 78% in the UFC, but we've seen it much improved from previous years. So I wouldn't be surprised if Pannie could stuff the takedowns. Like you mentioned, she has a win over Alexis Davis, who had a similar game plan. She has a win over Sajara Eubanks, who had a similar game plan.
That's a solid win.
That's a very solid win. And now it's like Raquel Pennington has always been somebody that I'm not super impressed with. I know she's been okay against some of the better fighters in this division, but it's mostly because she's able to neutralize their offense, not so much get her offense going. So this is one where I honestly think it has split decision written all over it. So in that sense, there's not enough plus money for me to take a shot on Pannie Kianzad, but I don't hate the Kianzad by decision. I think I saw a plus 185 on FanDuel. I just think in a split decision scenario, which I do think this is split decision or 29-28, either way, it's just whatever the judges feel like favoring that night. Are they going to favor the cage push, cage control by Raquel Pennington, but not a lot of strikes, not a lot of damage? Or are they going to favor the volume, the damage that Pannie is likely landing when the fight plays out at range? So I actually don't hate the Kianzad by decision. That is the way she wins. If she wins, I highly doubt she earns the finish. So if that's still available, now that all my other bets pretty much got canceled this week after losing 2 on the Moda fight, and then I had some slight CLV on Dakota Bush. I think you were on that as well. That got canceled too. So this is a fight where we got a lot of bets getting canceled. So that might actually be an ad for me is Pannie by decision.
Yep, and that line is still available over on FanDuel Sportsbook. That's a good shout. I likely won't have any action on the fight. I'll be rooting for the overwhelmingly likely outcome that is a close split decision where neither fighter scores well on DraftKings. And I don't know, hopefully I can go on a beer run, do something productive with my life for those 15 minutes. Let's move on to our next fight of the evening. We got Tafon and Nchukwi. He's a minus 120 favorite over slow Mike Rodriguez. Comes back plus 100. Even money underdog is Rodriguez. And this is another fight with the DraftKings prices are certainly not lined up with the current betting market. We got Tafon. He's 8.8K on DraftKings, despite being just the tiniest of favorites. And then slow Mike Rodriguez is someone who I think I'm going to be prioritizing on DraftKings this week at $7,400. And that just kind of brings me into this matchup here where, I think Tafon is someone who has kind of been a divisive person to talk about within the MMA community, because there were some people that saw him in that Jamie Pickett fight and were like, oh, this guy's durable, seems to be fast for the weight class at 185 pounds. He's a big dude. Was able to carry a pace for 15 minutes. Like he's certainly a strong, very green guy, has 6 fights in his professional career. That's not inside the UFC. His 4th career fight was on Dana White Contender Series. So it's just kind of one of those things. Tafon, right? People are very divided on him. And with Mike Rodriguez, I don't really think anyone's divided. Like we know what this guy is now. He's first round finish, looks good, decent kickboxer, but when the fight gets extended, when people try to take him down, he really struggles with any prototype that's not someone who's going to stand right in front of him and get hit early on in the fight. But I will say that, I like slow Mike Rodriguez on DraftKings this week. I don't have a particularly strong read on who wins the fight, but if there's something we do know about Mike Rodriguez, it's that when he does win, he's doing so in fashion that it's extremely DraftKings friendly. He has 3 wins within the UFC. He scored 103 points, 129 points, and 109 points in those 3 wins, and they're all first-round knockouts. Now, I'm not saying that he's only can win via knocking out Tafon in the first round, but he's a guy who has a way more finishing upside to me in the early rounds than a guy like, Zong, who's going to be 7.6K and is going to be massive chalk. I'd prefer to just go down, play Mike Rodriguez, because I don't think Mike Rodriguez is overwhelmingly likely to win the fight. I think it's probably 50-50. Like, gun to my head, I'd probably bet him at plus 100. But to me, if he can kind of avoid the clinch in this spot and just kind of, use his teeps to the body, his longer range weapons, I think he has a good shot to get Tafon out of there. We've seen Tafon definitely eat shots before. His wrestling was exposed a little bit in his last fight, but he's certainly not someone who I look at and I think of like as someone super mobile who's not going to stand in front of Mike Rodriguez and give him opportunity to win via knockout. So I like the Mike Rodriguez side here. I assume he'll be somewhat popular in DraftKings, but that's chalk that I'm more comfortable eating, and probably something I want you to talk about, Jon. And we see this in all types of sports. In NFL, when someone is scratched, like last week is a perfect example when the Raheem Mostert gets news that he's going to be, running back 1. And for those of you who don't follow, I know there's a little PTSD there with the injury, but like Trey Sermon is a healthy scratch essentially for the 49ers. And Mostert becomes a really strong play in the mid-range of DraftKings, which not only gets people on him, but the way the ownership gravitates is all the other mid-range running backs. Who are they? Like Mike Davis, Joe Mixon was a little more expensive, but everyone in that like 5 to 6K price range in DraftKings, and I'll tie this back to MMA in a second, everyone loses a little bit of ownership in that price range. And I think that might be what happens here with Mike Rodriguez, where, look, it looked like he was going to be even money underdog, 7.4K, has all the finishing upside. That's going to be a guy who's popular. And then all of a sudden we have someone who's minus 300 for only $200 more. And so when people gravitate to the more chalky fighter, we lose some ownership on Mike Rodriguez. So I'm comfortable eating that chalk. Jon, if you want to talk a little bit more about how like ownership leverage works out in those spots, I would love to hear that. And then just kind of your take on the fight. Like, are you on the Tafon side here? Do you like Mike Rodriguez? And just, what are you doing in general on DK as well? I know it's a lot of things to throw at you, but I think it's an important fight for the slate this weekend and one I'm looking at target.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And I resent that Mostert comment. I have to think that was you needling me for betting the over.
No, not at all. Like, he was my third highest
Raheem
running back in
speak for yourself, McCaudry, because I do have PTSD from Raheem Mostert, because I know this guy gets hurt every single game. He's literally the Anthony Davis of the NFL. And then I bet his over on his rushing prop, instantly hurt, out for the year. Oh, well. But yeah, so going back to this fight, like, I get it in the sense that either guy can win here. No doubt about it. I don't have a strong take on who can win. I think both guys are capable of finishing as well. But I also I want to push back a little bit, because I feel like Rodriguez is going to get pretty popular on this slate. And we have seen some serious concerns with him, and he is much, much cheaper. He has the obvious line value. I'm not discrediting any of that. He's a good on paper play, but at the same time, he has, I can't put money on this guy. DraftKings lineups for sure. But in terms of betting, I personally can't do it. Even though maybe the grappling isn't a concern, as much of a concern in this matchup, but I wouldn't be surprised if Nchukwi does go to that, he has some okay wrestling in the past. I wouldn't be shocked if he landed takedowns here. And it's if he wrestles, I think he covers a minus 120 price tag. Now, I'm not betting him because I don't trust him to come in and wrestle. But at the same time, I'm not betting Rodriguez for those reasons. I think both guys can win by knockout early in the fight. You mentioned the upside that Rodriguez has. Absolutely. When he wins, which it doesn't seem to happen often lately, but when he wins, he tends to score pretty well. He is going to have a reach advantage, a size advantage. He does have power. But you mentioned the durability of Nchukwi. We've seen him get hit with a lot of shots because he doesn't really move his head, but he doesn't seem to be fazed by really any of them. So it's, He's been pretty durable. Like I said, I think both guys can win here. I do slightly favor Nchukwi, so we're kind of on opposite sides there, but it's not like a strong take. I think you can get exposure to both sides. I just lean Nchukwi because I think he's going to throw more volume, and I think the one thing where I feel confident in is saying that he has a cardio advantage here. You know, Mike Rodriguez always tends to slow down, and yeah, it's more so when he's pushed by wrestlers and grapplers. But just in general, he does not have good cardio. We've seen Nchukwi at least carry his power and his volume through 15 minutes. So that's why I slight lean Nchukwi. Either guy can win by knockout. I think you can certainly get exposure to it. But when it comes to DraftKings, like you were asking, 8.8K, like he's clearly overpriced in this matchup. Like if you're playing him there, it's strictly as an ownership play, as a leverage play. And then you still need him to come through and probably earn a finish or land multiple takedowns if he comes in with the wrestle heavy game plan. But it's not something that like I trust him to do. So in that sense, at 8.8K, you know, he's just an ownership leverage play. He's not a core piece. And Mike Rodriguez, I'd probably come in underweight, still get some exposure because of the obvious line value. But I just think there's so many options on a 14 fight slate. Like anyone who I have concerns about, like him or Zhu Rong, that's going to carry a ton of ownership. I'm almost always going to look for ways to just different builds, just look at different fighters in that range to get different combinations and then hope that the chalk fails, because it's just helping you out that much more when you're not on the same lineups as everybody else.
Yeah, so a few things before we move on to the next fight. First of all, like you've mentioned the Mike Rodriguez ownership a lot. We got to get a side bet going. Like how owned do you think he's going to be in the, what is it, like $18, $15 throwdown this weekend? Like what are you expecting?
So, I mean, it's tough on a Thursday night to project ownership, especially when I haven't listened to anybody yet. Like I'll listen to the Dogger Pass guys. I'll listen to Brett Appley, other guys if I have time. Just to get a sense of where ownership's going to be, and then obviously look at some projections as well. But on a 14 fight card, like we got to temper our expectations as well, because it's just naturally going to be more spread out. I know I'm dancing around the topic, but I'm just trying to think of a number in my head.
We can book it in the Discord.
Yeah, I would say it's over 20% though, for sure.
Okay, I was going to say under 25, so maybe we're in the same ballpark-ish.
Okay.
Two other things on this fight real quick before we move on is so this fight's at 205 is the one thing I wanted to mention, just in terms of Tafon being able to take shots. At 185, he's a big dude, but like a 20-pound gap is a lot. Like going from 185 to 205 is a big gap, way bigger than like 135 to 145. Obviously, it's 20 pounds versus 10, but like light heavyweight is definitely a step up from where Tafon has been fighting. And I know he has fought at 205 before, but I'm just saying in terms of his durability, like he probably hasn't fought a hitter like Mike Rodriguez to this point. And then the last thing I wanted to say, just in terms of, I thought you made a great point at the end saying like you could leverage and, you know, pay up for Tafon. I think that this week, kind of the chalky build, and at least I think it's chalky because it's where I find myself gravitating, is going superstars on scrubs, because you can get in, you know, multiple fighters over 9K. And then you have guys like Mike Rodriguez, like Zhu Rong at 7.6K, who you're able to kind of balance out your lineup with. And those would be the so-called scrubs along with your stars. I think that getting a unique build this week includes a lot of mid-range fighters. I don't want to talk too much more about NFL, but like we just think about last week, it's so easy with everyone playing to kind of, you know, draw comparisons. Last week, everyone was jamming in super low-priced wide receivers, $3,000 wide receivers in DFS, and super expensive running backs. If you made a lineup with cheap running backs and expensive wide receivers, you had a ton of leverage on the field just because of the way you were building. And of course, you know, DraftKings MMA is a little bit different in the fact that like we don't have position requirements you need to meet. But in terms of how you build your lineups and the salary, I don't think there's going to be a lot of high-owned fighters, you know, outside of like the main event between $8.5 thousand and 7.8K. So if you're building around that range, I think that's your best way to just kind of get unique on this slate if that's something you're searching for. All right, let's move on. I believe we have 6 fights left, so we'll pick up the pace a little bit here. It is exhausting to go through all 14 of these, but let's get it. He continued on with Joaquin Buckley here. Joaquin Buckley is a -190 favorite, $9.3 thousand on DK against Antonio Arroyo, who comes back +170, a nice $6.9 thousand on DraftKings. John, I'll kick this one to you first here. What do you make of the matchup between Buckley and Arroyo?
Yeah, this one, I'm definitely not a big Arroyo guy. I don't think many people are. Buckley, obviously, everybody knows him from the viral knockout that he had over Impa Kasanganay. But at the same time, like, I don't know, man. Like minus 200, I'm not looking to lay it with Buckley. Obviously, he probably should win by knockout in this one, but the biggest concerns I have with Buckley is his durability for one, but also his defensive grappling when he faces like somebody that is the legitimate wrestler or grappler. His takedown defense is currently 100%, but like it's super flawed because the only time anybody has actually shot against him was Jordan Wright, who we both know, the Beverly Hills Ninja, not necessarily known as a credentialed wrestler. So I think his takedown defense is solid, but I also think it's pretty untested. I think Arroyo is just a guy that his win margins are so thin. Like he doesn't throw a ton of volume. He has powerful leg kicks, but that's basically all he has at range. Doesn't really follow it up with any punches. He's a pretty decent submission grappler, but he doesn't really go to the wrestling that much. I think that's his path to victory here, because I think if he stays at range, he gets knocked out by Buckley here. So I think he probably needs to land takedowns. I don't think he's going to. I think Buckley could even land takedowns in this matchup. We saw Arroyo get taken down, 12 times by Deron Winn. Deron Winn's obviously a good wrestler, but that's been a concern for Arroyo, is getting stuck on his back, getting taken down multiple times. And the cardio is just terrible. I mean, it's plagued him in the past, but against Deron Winn, like he gassed. I know it was short notice, but he gassed like not even the end of the first round. And he's sitting there like he couldn't even hardly stand up on his own. So I favor Buckley. I think the price is a little bit wide in terms of the money line, but I think he probably does win by knockout here.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate breakdown. I am definitely not on the Antonio Arroyo train. He's someone who I think he's pretty one-dimensional. You mentioned the leg kicks. We've seen a couple of nice body kicks as well. The cardio is a major liability. I'm not necessarily buying Buckley's stock per se. I think he's a pretty one-dimensional fighter. I think we've seen him outclassed a few times at this point. And it's one of those things with Buckley where he was riding so high on the hype, and now the hype has kind of died down off of that Impa Kasanganay knockout, obviously. But I do think like minus 200, somewhat close to accurate. I'm not laying that price on a guy who I don't think is going to offensively wrestle. You mentioned you thought he could land takedowns. If he tried, maybe, but he's not someone who we've really known to try to wrestle too often. I know he does have a little bit of a wrestling background, obviously a strong dude who's able to take people down and just kind of, use his power inside the clinch against the fence, those situations. But it's hard to lay minus 200 in a striking battle, especially when the guys are super likely to throw down, right? Like Buckley is in an Israel Adesanya style point fighter, or Stephen Wonderboy, who I'm happy to lay minus 200 with. He's a guy who's probably going to bang it out. And he got head kick knocked out his last time out. I just think it's tough to lay that price on him from a betting perspective. But DraftKings, he has as much upside as anybody else on this slate, right? Like the guy hits hard. We've seen him do it often. I think he has a solid chance to win by KO here. Let's move on to our next fight. We got Tony Gravely, currently a minus 210 favorite against Nate Maness, who comes back plus 180, plus 175. Gravely, $9,200 on DraftKings. Maness is $7K. And I'll go first here. This is my the second fight that I bet on the card. And I'm on the Tony Gravely train. I bet him at minus 160. So shaping up, hopefully, to be a nice amount of CLV in this spot. I also bet him today to win in the decision-only market, which we talk about sometimes on the show. You could find that on DraftKings Sportsbook, and that's just basically if the fight ends inside the distance, my bet is void. But if it hits the scorecards, I'm laying minus 190 on Tony Gravely, getting the dub there. So I have I have a half unit on him to win via decision and a full unit at minus 160 on the money line. I think this is a really good matchup for Tony Gravely. And Tony is a guy who I think the way I would describe him is his skill set should be a way better fighter than the way he has translated it into his fighting style. He's a really good wrestler offensively in terms of takedowns and just being a powerhouse. He throws with decent power. We saw that last time in his knockout win over Anthony Burchak earlier this year. And I mentioned Burchak earlier in the show as someone you should be winning against in the year 2021. But look, he went out and got it done with the hands there, which was something we hadn't really seen from him before so much. And I know, he beat him up on the ground as well in that fight. But Tony Gravely is someone who I'm high on his skill set, but man, he's a little bit tough to back in the market. And that's why I only had a unit at minus 160, because he's a little bit flaky, man. Like, he gives me these vibes like he sometimes doesn't want to be in there when the going gets tough. The Brett Johns fight where he saw, extended periods of success in there. Cardio is not great, and he expends a lot of energy, man. Liam Picks Fights was in here earlier. He was talking about it yesterday when I went on his show. Tony Gravely holds guys down for not very long. And yeah, having over 6 takedowns per 15 minutes is a great attribute to have. But dude, like, if you can only hold someone down for 30 seconds, 40 seconds, it's really difficult to continue to pick them up and put them down and get high amplitude takedowns. And it's just like Gravely's taking guys down just for them to get up and him to take them down again. So it's hard to back Gravely, but man, I think his skill set is so much better than Nathan Maness, because Maness came out there, UFC debut, kind of controversial win, if you will, over Johnny Munoz, which I think if they ran it back tomorrow, we'd have Munoz as a big favorite. And then Luke Sanders, who just retired today, shout out to Luke Sanders. He was losing that fight, man. And then he comes back, gets the submission in round 2. But I think in terms of winning minutes, Tony Gravely is just going to be so dominant in this spot. I think he's a guy who is going to take you down repeatedly over and over again. I don't think Maness is someone with great stand-up that's really going to make Gravely pay for the holes in his game. So, look, I'm on Tony Gravely big here. I think it's a decent play on DraftKings. The one thing I'll say about Gravely's game that might not be great for real life, but is great for DraftKings, is honestly wrestlers who don't have great control are sometimes cheat codes in DFS, and we've seen this with Marab. It's a little bit less so in the newer scoring that rewards points, I should say, for total strikes and control time. But like back in the day when you would only get points for passing guard and takedowns, Marab was a cheat code because he'd take you down and then let you back up and then just take you down again. And he's like racking up 5 points over and over, as opposed to just getting 5 and, holding position for the rest of the round. So Gravely, I think, lands like upwards of 5 takedowns in the spot. I know Maness is a decent guillotine, which provides some danger for Gravely, but at the same time, if you're pulling guillotine, you're usually falling to your back, and that's credited as a takedown. So I think Gravely's a strong play in all DFS formats, and I've got a lot of money on him this weekend in the betting market as well. Am I crazy, John? I feel like I just told you I bet on a guy, and then I spent 5 minutes talking to you about how he's kind of flaky and someone who's difficult to trust. So are you on the underdog here, or do you side with me on the Tony Gravely side as a considerable favorite at this point?
Yeah, so I actually like him more than you do, and I didn't even bet him at the money line, so that's funny. But I bet him to win by decision at plus 150 or plus 155, I think, on FanDuel. But I echo a lot of your sentiments. Like, I've always kind of liked Tony Gravely. You mentioned a couple reasons why. He comes from the high-level wrestling background. He was a 2-time high school state champion in high school, and then he wrestled collegiately at Appalachian State. So, I mean, there's no doubt about it. He's a high credential wrestler. We've seen it at the UFC level. He's going to land takedowns in volume. And that's what I love about him. Like, you mentioned the control time, but I'm sitting there like cha-ching, cha-ching. Like, I don't even care that he's not banking the control time, because each time he takes his guy down, you mentioned he averages over 6 takedowns per 15 minutes. Each time I'm getting 5 points on DraftKings. And I know the cardio is not like, I just think it's overblown a little bit. Like, I've heard multiple times in some of his fights, like, people worry about the cardio. Like, I think for the most part, his cardio is not bad. Like, I think his cardio where you start to see it really is the 3rd round. And that's after, like you said, keeping up a strong pace for the first 12 minutes, like of just nonstop takedowns, nonstop action. So it's like, I think the cardio is a little bit overblown. And then in terms of his striking, I think his striking is a little bit better than people give him credit for. Like, he's a good boxer. He has power. You mentioned the left hook that dropped, what's his name, in his last fight. And Nate Maness, like, I've been fading Nate Maness in pretty much, I think, both of his fights. Like, he shouldn't have won the Johnny Munoz fight. Like, he got dominated there. Munoz banked like 10 minutes of control time, almost finished him with a head and arm choke, triangle choke in the first round, and ended up getting, hit below the belt a few times. I thought even with a point deduction, Munoz should have won that fight. And then in his last fight, you mentioned the Luke Sanders, like, Luke Sanders almost finished him. Like, Luke Sanders was piecing him up, and then it was like, oh, he got his back, and then insta tap from Luke Sanders, and you're sitting there like, what just happened? Like, it made no sense. Like, I just think both his wins are fraudulent. Not that he's a fraudulent fighter, but I just don't think he's a great fighter. And Tony Gravely at least has the skill set to be a good fighter. And I just think he dominates. Like, I just think stylistically, this is a good matchup for him. I bet him, like I said, to win by decision. So semi with you there. I think he comes through for us. Didn't play him on the money line, but I do think he covers the price tag here.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's move on to our next fight. We got Arman Tsarukyan as our biggest favorite on the slate. Man, he's minus 850, 9.6K against Christos Giagos. I'll go first here. I'll be relatively quick. I think this is a really tailor-made matchup for Arman. You know, Arman's a guy who's coming here and kind of caught our attention with a really, I wouldn't say, you know, really competitive fight, although I guess I just did. But like the Islam Makhachev fight in a loss was about as impressive as you get in the debut for Tsarukyan. And then, you know, he beat OAM, Davi Hamos, Matt Frivola, took a bunch of those guys down, which is impressive. Arman, to me, is a top 4 grappler at 155 pounds. Russian guy. Giagos is solid when he's kind of able to be the hammer in the grappling realms. Like, he does well when he has guys who he can really take advantage of, like Carlston Maness. He was ragdolling him around. You know, Giagos is a dangerous guy in the pure wrestling for about 7.5, 8 minutes, but his cardio falls off a cliff. And to me, in this spot, he just has no real paths to victory. You know what I mean? Like, Arman Tsarukyan is someone who you're not going to offensively grapple him. I mean, Makhachev struggled to do so. So Giagos, I doubt, can hit takedowns of his own in this spot. I really just think that Arman's going to be able to take him down and kind of, you know, muscle him on the ground, hold him down, kind of do whatever he wants. And I kind of think that Arman late finish props are interesting. He's won 3 UFC fights, all by decision, but I do think that Giagos is someone who slows down when he's going well. And if things are going wrong for him, man, I think he might slow down, you know, even faster in a spot like that. So I don't know. I think Arman minus 850, I'm not betting him or anything like that, but I do think he wins. I think he wins with relative ease. I might look to see if there's like round 2, round 3 props on FanDuel PointsBet. Sometimes offer those like finishing bands, I believe they call them. So if you win in rounds 2 or rounds 3, it's plus whatever. I kind of like that here with Arman because I do think that he'll have chances to finish late in the fight. And I guess talking about finishing in terms of Arman this weekend, John, like that's the main question. The guy's $9,600 on DraftKings. Are you getting to that? Because if he wins by decision, yeah, he's going to get takedowns for sure, but it's a hefty price to pay, and there's a lot of opportunity costs on this slate with Montel Jackson right below him as a solid chance to finish early in the fight. Like, how are you handling a guy like Arman Tsarukyan, who historically has been dominant, but not really a great finisher? And in terms of DraftKings, he's put up, you know, solid scores, but nothing that's like always been slate breaking, right? Like against Frivola, 126. But prior to that, his 2 wins that I would consider relatively dominant over Hamos and OAM, mid 80s. And if he puts that score up this weekend, I mean, he's drawing dead to be optimal at 9.6K. So I guess my question to you is kind of how are you approaching this on DraftKings with Arman so expensive this week?
Yeah, I still like him though. Like even in a decision, I think he banks enough control time and takedowns and control time and activity on the mat to where he probably pays off the salary. Like I trust him even at an expensive price tag. I trust him more than Blanchfield. I trust him more than who else did we talk about? That was like one
Montel
of those
Jackson at 9.5 is a decision. I prefer Jackson personally.
Yeah, that one I probably prefer Jackson, but I thought there was one other expensive one that we were kind of meh on.
There's like Buckley's up there, 9.3K.
Yeah,
like I think Buckley's
I don't even think that.
Price.
Yeah, I don't even think that's a decision. Like Tsarukyan over Buckley for sure. Like I just think Tsarukyan. You mentioned the grappling. Like he's probably going to land multiple takedowns here. The control time's great, but on the feet, like I know he's more of a decision guy. I would not be surprised to see him get a finish here. Like we've seen him get a decision in all of his fights, but you mentioned the concerns with Giagos. Like he was getting pieced up by Sean Soriano before he took him down and got the submission, cashed a ticket for us there. Shout out to us. But yeah, I mean, I just think Tsarukyan, I mean, anywhere this fight goes, Tsarukyan has the advantage. He's younger, he's faster, he's more athletic, he's got a striking advantage, he's got a grappling advantage, he's got a wrestling advantage. Like there's really nowhere that I think Giagos can win. So in that sense, I mean, I think Tsarukyan's pretty safe here. I think he probably scores decent, but again, he is expensive. I'd favor Jackson in that expensive price range, but you mentioned the value we have on this slate for single entry or something like that. Like you can go Jackson, Tsarukyan, take some of the line value in Rodriguez, or even Zhu Rong, if you want to swing that way. I probably won't, but I'm just saying there is enough value on a full 14 fight card to where you can fit in 2 of these studs. And I think Sarukian is probably my 1B to Montel Jackson.
That's fair enough. I think, 1A, 1B is a good way to describe it. I think I like Montel here. I'm interested to see what, projected ownership looks like, because obviously if one's much more owned than the other, I'd probably prefer to go the other way in GPPs, although I assume it'll be relatively similarly priced. They project, relatively similarly in the fact that, similar size favorites. Sarukian more likely probably on a points per minute sort of basis, but I think Montel has more early finishing upside. And for that reason, that's why he's my, quote unquote 1A this weekend in the upper range. Let's move on to our featured bout of the evening. We have Ariane Lipski minus 120, 8.2K against Mandy Bohm, making her UFC debut, plus 108K. John, I already see you smirking over there. I'll just quickly set this up. I went to go look at this fight, and I saw Mandy Bohm on the Bellator in the Bellator cage, and I saw her get taken down within 30 seconds, and then I saw her go to a body lock from the bottom. And I thought, oof, do I really have to bet Ariane Lipski in this spot? And then I pull up the FTN Bets tracker, ftnbets.com/MMA. I go look to see what my boy John is on, and I see an Ariane Lipski money line bet at minus 115. If there's anything in the world that would make me bet on Lipski, it's 1, seeing you bet her in the tracker, and 2, hearing you try to talk me and the people into betting the disaster that has been Ariane Lipski in the UFC. So, John, the floor is all yours, my man. Talk to me about this bet for you.
Yeah, this is one where I just had to do it. There was nothing, you can't. I even put in one of our Discords that we're in together. I'm like, somebody please talk me out of betting Ariane Lipski here. Nobody could do it. I bet her at minus 115, like you said. I thought about even taking a poke at the KO prop. FanDuel had plus 500, I think. I think that's a good stab. But, I mean, already playing her at the money line, I didn't want to be, knee-deep in Ariane Lipski tickets. But I do think she is the side here. I think, Lipski's biggest thing is, she struggles to defend takedowns. Even if you don't really have a sense of wrestling, you'll probably land takedowns against her. But I just think she's being undervalued in general because she does have good striking. She is powerful. Coming out from the regional scene, all of her, where did she fight? KSW, I think. All of her wins came by knockout. She had solid striking. We saw glimpses of it at the UFC level. The De Padua fight, she dropped her. She does have power. It's just she's always concerned about getting taken down. When she is taken down, she has no sense of get up games. She doesn't have much grappling. But I do think she is making improvements. She's been training with Amanda Nunes for recently for this fight during camp. I just think in a fight where she probably doesn't need to defend takedowns here, I think she's gonna have a striking advantage. I think she's gonna have a power advantage. Yeah, I mean, it's low-level women's MMA. I could be wrong with just a random level up from Mandy Bohm, but based on what I saw from tape, Mandy Bohm, I just don't think is very good at all. She's making her UFC debut, fought over in Bellator, but she fought basically a lunch lady over in Bellator, and she wasn't even able to get the finish there. It really didn't impress me whatsoever. And you mentioned some of the concerns you saw with her on tape. A previous fight, she fought someone that was 3-0 who didn't even try to take her down. She just sort of rushed forward and pushed her, and she fell down and then got stuck on her back for the entire round. So I just have some serious concerns with Bohm. I actually think Lipski could offensively grapple here a little bit. And I know that's kind of concerning too, but it's well, if I favor her to win the striking and I'm not even sure that her opponent has the wrestle or grappling advantage, I probably have to bet her if it's close to a pick. So I think she's the side here. In terms of DraftKings, it's probably a pass either way. But in Lipski wins, it probably comes, she has a decent, I won't say it probably comes by finish, but I do think she has a better chance to finish than the market's currently giving her respect for. The only thing I'll say is that Bohm, somebody in one of our chats that we're in, somebody posted the Bohm Instagram photo.
She looks massive.
That looks like it had to be Photoshopped. Seeing that, I was hedge me out of my Lipski bets. She literally looks and we just saw her not that long ago. She looked tall, gangly, sort of awkward body type. The photo that she posted on Instagram, like she literally looks like she is juiced out of her mind. Like she looks like a Russian Sambo champion in that photo. I'll put it that way. So that definitely was concerning. Like I said, if we just see a random level up where she just looks ultra physical and just outmuscles Lipsky, then okay, sure, whatever. I wasn't expecting that whatsoever. But outside of that, I think Lipsky's the side here.
Yeah, like I was looking for a reason to not bet Lipsky, because look, like I hate Lipsky, dude. Like she's really burned me in the past because I originally cashed Molly McCann against her way back in the day. That was a great win, and then she burned me so bad in the Luana Carolina fight. I've told this story before. I was at like a family dinner, wasn't watching. She was mega chalk on DK. I think I faded her outright 150, like literally 0%. And she gets that knee bar, and I just saw the alert come up on my phone. Like, you've got to be kidding me that Ariane Lipsky just won via knee bar and like absolutely buried me. But we got her back. We got the Montana De La Rosa big ticket cash earlier this year. Had a bet on her. I'm just not a Lipsky guy in general, right? Like Tim in the chat put Queen of Nonviolence. That's what we've seen so far in the UFC so far out of her. But in general, like if you go back and watch Lipsky's fights, man, you got to give her credit. Like, she does hit hard. She kicks to the head. Like, if Mandy Bohm isn't able to get this fight to the ground a considerable amount, I think she's pretty much fucked at range. And so I would prefer personally to bet Lipsky KO plus 500 than her money line. Because to me, in order to win, in order to cover a price that I'm comfortable paying on Lipsky, knowing how bad knowing that Augusta Win could take her down and like lose her around, if not the fight. Knowing that, I think I would prefer to just take the KO plus 500, but it's nothing like super. It's not something I feel super strongly about. John, you're the only one that has a bet on it to this point, but maybe I'll hop on the Lipsky train for what I believe would be the first time in my life. So maybe you talk me into it.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say is we have a little development here. That photo might be fake. I don't see it.
Your Instagram. You see your Instagram? I just posted it.
Yeah, I'm looking now, and I'm not even seeing that photo, which the photo that we were sent was from her Instagram. So I don't know, man. And then like the photo she did post on IG, she looks pretty good, but not the photo. Like the photo that we saw, she looked like shredded.
Yeah, she looks.
I don't know. We'll have to dig more.
We'll just see tomorrow morning. I'm excited to see that. I'm not like a big weigh-ins guy, but that's something that I'm definitely gonna be looking to tomorrow morning at the weigh-ins. Let's move on to the co-main event here. We got two more fights to go. We got Jan Kutelaba minus 150, 9K against Devin Clark here, plus 130 for Clark, 7.2K. And this is an interesting fight for me because it kind of reminds me of the Giagos versus Saryukian fight to a much lesser extent, where we have Devin Clark here, who's a guy who normally sees most of his success via wrestling. I don't think he's a great wrestler, but he kind of does the Rocky Pennington where he pushes you against the cage, just kind of grinds you out, outlasts you. The Alonzo Menefield fight is a great example of that. But I think he's going to really struggle to do so in the first round here against Jan Kutelaba, who is a dangerous man for at least the first 5 minutes of the fight. And I expect that Kutelaba is going to have a lot of success early on in this fight. I think he's going to be able to just kind of like strongman Devin Clark. I think he hits harder than him. I think he'll be able to stop takedown attempts, maybe even land a takedown attempt of his own. I mean, what I saw to Devin Clark on the ground against Anthony Smith his last time out was not good, to put it nicely. In terms of my pick for the fight, I'd like to live bet Devin Clark, and I consider betting him pre-flop. It's just I think he's going to lose round one so much here. Like even 10-8 territory. He also isn't a guy that has showed a ton of durability in the past. He is someone that has kind of been susceptible to getting submitted, but also getting hurt on the feet a little bit. And sometimes he's able to, grind it out, take guys into deeper waters. And that's where I think he would win a fight against Jan Kutelaba. But with Jan, he's so dominant early. And speaking of Instagram, like this guy seems to be in the shape of his life. I mean, he always looks to be in good shape, but currently, like Kutelaba is absolutely shredded, hits super hard. He's obviously drawing dead to guys like, Ankalaev the way he did 2 times in a row. But if you give him someone who he's kind of just able to out-muscle and can't out-technique him to the point that an Ankalaev can, he's dangerous, especially early in fights. Even the Dustin Jacoby fight, poured it on in the first round there. So I kind of like Kutelaba on DraftKings a lot here because this is the spot that I was thinking about paying up to be contrarian, because first of all, I like Devin Clark. I'm going to play a lot of Devin Clark at 7.2K, just plus 130. Just makes sense, right? You want to pay up for the Montel Jacksons of the world. You want to pay up for the Arman Saryukians of the world. You need to save somewhere, and this is a good spot. However, I think this is the spot that you pay up to get contrarian, because Cutelaba is only minus 150, and he is a whopping $9,000 on Draftkings. But that doesn't change the fact that so much of his win equity comes via either finishing early or racking up a ton of takedowns, even if he gasses out late. Even the last fight that he was in against the Cutelaba versus Jacoby fight, I think he landed somewhere, I'm just take off the top of my head, like 8 takedowns in the first round. I believe that fight was a draw, and he scored almost 100 points or almost 90 points on DraftKings. So he has a massive ceiling, kind of finish or not, just via first round domination. And I don't think he's going to be able to take down Devin Clark 8 or 9 times in this fight, but I do think he's really live for an early finish. And so let people be scared off of a minus 150 at 9K, because to me, at minus 150, it might as well be, plus 100 to finish in round 1. Because when we're thinking about narrow outcomes in DraftKings, that's what I think about with Jan Cutelaba. So I'm going to be having a lot of this fight. I'm going to have exposure to both sides, hopefully overweight on both sides, but specifically a spot where you can pay up to be contrarian this week, where I think a lot of people are playing the same underdogs, the same big favorites at 9.5, 9.6K. You can play someone at 9K flat who's not Anthony Smith, who's priced right next to the main event guy, and get some really good leverage on the field, because, Cutelaba has as much upside as really anybody does in all of DFS. So, John, that's kind of my take on the fight. What do you have here in our co-main event for Clark versus Cutelaba?
Yeah, you kind of stole my thunder with Cutelaba. I was kind of surprised there. Usually, like the front-running KO guys, you're usually fading more so
like,
than
I'm not
being
betting him, but we have to understand his outcome for DFS. You know what I mean?
And then, no, that's the great point. And that's what I was going to hit on, is like, yes, he has flaws. Yes, he has cardio issues. Like, he's probably going to cardio dump 6-7 minutes into the fight, maybe sooner. We don't know. But in terms of DraftKings, all we care about is upside and leverage. And he provides both in this scenario. Like, I really like Cutelaba here. I think Devin Clark's a guy who we've been concerned with his durability in the past. Only knocked out twice in his career, but we've seen him hurt multiple times. Like, he does not react well to getting hit, and he typically has to cage push, cage control, land takedowns. Comes from it's either like Division 2 or Division 3 or a JUCO wrestling background. So he's a decent wrestler, but not like to the highest level. And Cutelaba, former Sambo champion, I'd be surprised if he's just able to control Cutelaba, especially early in the fight. Cutelaba is fresh and powerful and not gassed out. Like, Cutelaba, I would favor in that department. So it's like, how does Devin Clark win here? I don't think he does. And if he does, it's probably like Cutelaba cardio dumps after 1, and Devin Clark edges out round 2 and then grinds on him in round 3. And so in that scenario, I guess you can take it to Devin Clark, but I don't even think in a Devin Clark win, unless he's able to land takedowns and bank control time, I don't even think he scores well in a win. So I like Cutelaba. I'm with you. I think at 9K, even though in terms of the money line, it seems a little expensive, Cutelaba, I mean, you can't argue the upside that he has on this slate is knockout in the first round, potentially even the 60-second bonus, which would just automatically make him optimal at that point. So I like Cutelaba just as much as you. I think an early finish is well within the cards here. Tim said plus 310 on Ian round 1 KO. I like that. Don't mind that at all. And hopefully we see some Hulk smash come Saturday evening.
Yes, fair enough. Glad to hear we're on the same page there. I do think that's a really strong leverage spot. Talked about it a bit in my article. We'll go over it. Obviously, in the free FTN Daily Discord, our MMA channel, always talking strategy there leading up to the fight card on Saturday. And also, we have an early lock this week. I think it's 4 p.m. Eastern time, so a little like a mid-afternoon card, so a little bit earlier than normal. Just a reminder for those of you who have made it this far in the show. All right, let's move on to the main event of the evening. We got Anthony Smith here. Lionheart is a minus 170 favorite against Ryan Spann, who comes back plus 150 just about. We got Smith, $9.1 thousand, Spann, 7.1K on DraftKings. And I just got in trouble for stealing John's thunder in the co-main event, so I figured I will let him have the floor and go first here in the main event with Anthony Smith against Ryan Spann. What do you got for me, John?
Yeah, I have no thunder in this fight. No, I think this one is just kind of one of those things where Anthony Smith has fought against the highest level of the light heavyweight division, John Jones, everybody who's anybody. Even in his most recent fight, a lot of people, myself included, I thought Jimmy Crute, I thought this was going to be like a coming out party for Jimmy Crute. Didn't end up happening. And yes, there was a little bit of flukiness in terms of Crute getting the foot drop there, but I mean, credit to Anthony Smith for landing a really nasty. I think he landed a couple nasty leg kicks there, but yeah. So he got the TKO victory there at UFC 261. Smith is just a guy who's I say this every time, but it's so true. Like, he's not a good minute winner, but he's a decent finisher. So it's like, seeing him as a sizable favorite, I never want to put money on him. I think if you are betting him, you probably need to do it inside the distance because that's how he wins. But anytime he's dropped, I mentioned the level of competition. Anytime he's made a step down in terms of the level of competition, he's historically been pretty good. And I think that's what we see here, like against Ryan Spann, who I know he's coming off the first round knockout against Misha Cirkunov. Like, that's a decent win, but let's be honest, Cirkunov has some pretty serious durability concerns. And really, aside from that, I know he's 5-1 in the UFC, but he hasn't really had any other notable wins. Like, I know he's fought guys who you would recognize, like Sam Alvey. Who else has he fought?
He fought Devin Clark. That's like probably
Devin Clark. I think he submitted Devin Clark. But I mean, in terms of facing those guys, and then like Anthony Smith killed Devin Clark within like 2 minutes. Like, it wasn't even competitive. So in this fight, I just think, even though I have concerns with Smith being like a pretty big favorite here, I have to favor him to win the fight. I think he's got more power on the feet. I think he's the better submission grappler. The only way that Spann can really win here is obviously anyone can land a big shot and get the knockout. Smith has been knocked out 9 times in his career, but really not much recently. Like, recently, he's been historically pretty durable. So it's not like I want to say he's completely chinny or anything. A lot of those came years ago, early in his career, when he took fights that he shouldn't have. But outside of that, like, Spann probably has to just come in here and wrestle, land multiple takedowns, bank top control time. It's just stuff like we saw Rakic, like guys like that are able to do that, Glover Teixeira against Anthony Smith. But I'd be kind of surprised if Ryan Spann is able to implement that game plan. So I don't know, man. I think Anthony Smith probably gets the win here. The only angle I'd look at in terms of a betting angle is any unders are probably good here. Like, anything under 4.5, under 3.5, even. Spann's never gone 5 rounds, I don't think. And he really has slowed down. Like, even in the Sam Alvey fight, he almost died in the 3rd round. Like, I think if this fight gets extended, Anthony Smith finishes, whether it comes by knockout or submission. I probably lean towards a knockout, but either way, I think Smith gets the job done here inside the distance. He is a little bit expensive. I favor Kudalaba on DraftKings. I favor those other expensive guys we talked about, Montel Jackson and Sarukian. But yeah, I think Smith probably gets the done here. I think it gets done by finish. Yeah, thanks for joining us, Sean, in the chat. Yeah, we talked about that earlier with the Mata fight. I had 2 bets on that get canceled. But yeah, I again, it's just the wrestling. Spawn would have to come in with a wrestle heavy game plan. I don't know if he will, and I don't even trust him to be successful in that game plan. I actually think Jimmy Crute's wrestling is underrated there before the nasty foot thing. But yeah, I want to hear your thoughts on it, Jonah. I think Smith gets the job done via finish, but he's not my favorite play in the world on DraftKings.
Yeah, I'll pick Smith as well. It's not a spot that I have, a ton of, like a really strong opinion on. The few things that I thought you mentioned, a few things that I wanted to mention in addition to them. Ryan Spann, I do think he has some wrestling upside here. The Anthony Smith thing was a little concerning with the Jimmy Crute takedowns. I agree that Jimmy Crute is a solid fighter. I think he's a solid takedown artist, but with one leg, you probably shouldn't be taking down Anthony Smith. That's for sure. And look, like Smith gets stuck on his back. I saw a stat by this guy Monk on Twitter. 10% of the time that Anthony Smith spends grappling is in a dominant position. And part of that is because he plays off his back, throws up triangle chokes like we saw against Devin Clark that we were just talking about a few minutes ago. But I do think that there's a chance that Spann wins a round or two by just being on top. I do like unders as well. I think I saw like fight does not go to decision at like minus 270. Honestly, there might be some value in that. I did the math. Their fights combined in the UFC have gone the distance or have not gone the distance about 72.5% of the time, which is about minus 260. But then we add on to that kind of the stylistics of this matchup where Spann has only been to the championship rounds, one time, and it was in 2015. You mentioned he slowed down the Sam Alvey fight. And also, I think that Spann is the guy who's kind of been a little bit fortunate in terms of his durability. Like he walked into that same Sam Alvey hook like 5 or 6 times in that third round when he was gassed out. Johnny Walker, I mean, he should have put Johnny Walker away. He gets hit with those, Travis Brown elbows while shooting takedowns. He's now been knocked out by them twice. The first time was against Carl Roberson on Contender Series. Like, I do not think this is the most durable guy in the world. And if there's one thing about Anthony Smith, I don't think he's the best fighter in the world. I'm not necessarily excited to watch him in his 8th UFC main event per se. But this guy, I mean, if you don't get him out of there, outside of a total domination the way Glover Teixeira was able to, Anthony Smith is a lethal fighter in rounds 3, 4, and 5. And I think so Spann needs to win early because otherwise I think that Smith, crisper boxer, I just favor him as the fight goes on to win. And I even favor him early. So I'll pick Anthony Smith here. I think he's a hard guy to lay minus 160 on. But to me, Ryan Spann is just, I don't know. I just don't think he's like the same level of fighter as Anthony Smith. Granted, 205 pounds, you don't have to be that good to make the top 5, top 10. But to me, I don't watch Ryan Spann and be like, this is a guy who's ever going to be really in contention for the division. To me, his skill set is just so not one-dimensional because he's able to do multiple things, but it's just so lacking. Like, I see nothing that makes me think, oh, Ryan Spann has this skill to fall back on. But at the same time, Anthony Smith is kind of similar in the sense that he's like a jack of all trades, but is not necessarily dominant in one aspect of the game. So that's all I got on the main event. John, we did it. That is 14 fights going down at the Apex UFC Vegas 37 this Saturday night. I think we did a decent job discussing general DK strategy, all sorts of DFS stuff throughout the show and all of the fights. If you have anything to add on the main event, any of the 14 fights we talked about, feel free to do so. And if not, take us out of here, my man.
Yeah, that was it, man. It's good to be back as always. For those that don't know, we do this every Thursday night on the East Coast, a little bit earlier for those in Colorado like Jonah. But yeah, definitely appreciate the support. Should have asked earlier, but smash that like button and hit that subscribe button. We definitely appreciate it. That's it for tonight, though, guys. I'm John Kelly. That's Jonah Shiffman. This is the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network, saying goodbye and good luck, and we will see you guys next time.